now being recorded, and this is the third session in our plenary sessions for the 2023-60 LLB Intensive School. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank and introduce Professor Ganna Pogrebna. I do apologise if I have got the end of that wrong, who is the Executive Director of the new Artificial Intelligence and Cyber Futures Institute of Charles Sturt University. Ganna has a long background in blending behavioral science, AI, computer science, data analytics, engineering, and business model innovation. She has worked in both Europe and North America and now Australia across multiple universities, both Columbia University in New York, the University of Bonn in Germany, also the University of Innsbruck in Austria, University of Warwick and the University of Birmingham. And we are very, very lucky to have her heading up the new institute at Charles Sturt University. The theme for today, of course, for this session is all about research and the application of research into the future for lawyers and law graduates. And we thank her for her time in joining us here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, before I begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that where I am today. I'm joining from Taramirangal land, and also want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge and pay my respects to all First Nations people who are joining us in this session. I can see that there are our Wiradjuri land elders from Bathurst on the call, so just want to pay my respects to them as well. I just also want to say that considering that that's a school, you will actually need your mobile phones for this session. And at the end of my presentation, there will be a quiz. The quiz will be fun, I promise, but yeah, it will be just 5 questions. Yeah, but you know, we will see how we go. But yeah, just want to say, if you are kind of away from your cell phone, please pick it up because you will need it. All right. I also have to say that I can't really, like the way my computer works, I will not be able to see anyone when I'm presenting. So if you pop your kind of questions in the chat, I will kind of attend to them after I finish talking. But equally, if there is a particular point that you don't understand and you want to clarify, just feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in and ask questions. Okay, I'm happy to deal with them as I go along. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about kind of the synergies between law, emerging technology and human behavior. And I have to warn you that I'm not a lawyer at all. I'm a behavioral data scientist. So I started my journey in science as a decision theorist. If you don't know who decision theorists are, these are basically people who are like in the very, very narrow strand of economics. So what we do, we're trying to predict human behavior using mathematical models. And eventually, you know, after kind of working in a very theoretical methodological field, I got a job in engineering department in 2013 at the University of Warwick. And from that point on, my research became kind of more and more data scientist. So I do kind of a synergy between psychology, economics, and computer science at the moment, and we call it behavioral data science. So it's an interdisciplinary field. I guess the relevance of my being here is the fact that I worked with lawyers a lot. Particularly, I worked with Karen Jung on quite a few projects, including European regulation. So we wrote a large report to the Council of Europe in 2019, and it was on risks associated with artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. And we work with Karen since on quite a few papers. I'm going to talk about our chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Ethics of AI in particular. So we'll refer to it several times. But yeah, I mean, I just want to say that I have kind of long experience with this and also worked on European regulation in artificial intelligence. I come to this from a practitioner standpoint, so I'm not a lawyer, so you have to forgive me. So it's not going to be kind of from the general legal side. I will talk more about practical issues with law today, but hopefully it will be useful to you to kind of understand what is the intersection between practice and theory. But we will go quite deep into some of the legal documents today, particularly European regulation of artificial intelligence, and hopefully this will be of interest to everybody. Yeah, so yeah, just as a matter of introduction, this is me. I'm on all social media, so if you have after the fact some sort of thoughts, concerns, complaints, or questions, please feel free to just reach out to me. And yeah, I'm, like I said, I'm on all social media, so if you can't find me, it's your fault. I also want to say that even though I'm not a lawyer, I do have a master's degree in international law. So there is a little bit of a, a little bit of a relation to law. Yeah, I worked with a wide variety of organizations. This is just a small list of them. And like I said, most of the time I'm a practitioner, so I'm basically developing technology for industry. And you know, I because I work in quite methodological kind of mathematical field, it allows me to work in a lot of applications because mathematics kind of stays the same, but you can apply it to a lot of different domains. Yeah, to start with, I just want to say that we're currently living through the fourth industrial revolution, and you know, this is reality. This is already happening, and to say that, you know, we still have some time to figure it out would be unfair. And we are currently in a situation where the legislation or regulation of artificial intelligence is constantly lagging behind. So we don't have very good sort of understanding of how we're going to move forward, especially in Australia. I will get to Australia eventually, kind of towards the end of my talk. And mostly we'll concentrate on European regulation because that's where basically the most innovation is happening at the moment. To motivate my today's talk, I decided to start with the example when in 2019, the pedestrian was hit by a self-driving car. You probably all heard about this. So this was the case in Tempe, Arizona, when the self-driving car was put on the road. And here you see the actual car. The pedestrian kind of is in the, so this is the person with the bike who was crossing the road, and the human operator who was at the wheel at the time of the crash. And basically, you know, this is a very serious matter. So we have technology driving a vehicle, and it's supposed to work perfectly. But in this case, we have a loss of life, which is completely priceless. And the interesting part about this, if you, I don't know whether you followed this legal case, but if you read the case documents, you will find out that the car actually saw the pedestrian 6 seconds in advance. And 6 seconds is enough for a human being to react to a pedestrian. So if you are a driver at the wheel and you can kind of see someone crossing, 6 seconds is more than enough to kind of press on the brake and stop the car. But the car actually didn't recognize the pedestrian correctly. The car recognized pedestrian as a basically a bag, or an object, and didn't stop. So effectively, this was one of the technological issues. But what I want to say is that you know, there is you know, the case kind of went through the motions for quite a few years, and the result was that, you know, Uber was cleared of all charges, unsurprisingly, but there is still litigation against the human operator, which kind of tells you something about how we assign responsibility, right, in these cases. this case is kind of really a very good case to look at to understand why the problems that we have are not just legal problems when we talk about emerging technologies, but there are like these problems combine various disciplines. So various disciplines need to address it. So for example, the question is, why didn't the car stop, is a technical question. And this is a question for a computer scientist. The question is, who is responsible, is a question for a lawyer, right? We need to understand, is it Uber responsibility of the Uber? Is it responsibility of the city council who allowed these cars on the road and without kind of proper checks of risks and dangers that these vehicles could possess? Is it the responsibility of the human operator who was at the wheel at the time of the crash, and so on and so forth, right? Yeah, so there are obviously economic implications, for the Uber, but there are also ethical implications, like should this technology be on the road? And there are also behavioral implications. So what was human operator thinking? Like why was the human operator distracted? So what was exactly happening at that point in time? And so, yeah, the point of showing you this is that AI issues are really complex, and they need synergies of different sciences to resolve them. I want to give you some more examples of when AI, like why AI can hurt. This is an example from the legal domain. This is Compass system that, this is essentially an AI system that predicted reoffending in US for many, many years. And the problem with the system is that, it's trained on the current data from convicted felons in the US. And the problem is, of course, that, if you are Black, you have a lot higher chance of being in jail. And for that reason, this particular algorithm or this particular system was found to be extremely biased. If you Google Compass system for reoffending, for reoffending prediction or correctional offender management profiling for alternative sanctions, you will find quite a lot of papers showing that this system produces really racist outcomes. So here, for example, on my screen, you can see a white convicted felon and a Black convicted felon, Black African American convicted felon. And essentially, the white convicted felon has a lot more severe priors, has several armed robberies, and is classified as a low risk by the system. But then the Black African American convicted felon actually has really minor priors, and at the same time is considered a high risk. Right, so this is the world we live in. And if you ask me whether this system is still being used by the judges in the US, surprise, surprise, it is still being used. In 2018, there was a court hearing about it, and the court in Wisconsin actually ruled that the system can still be used, but the judges should be informed about potential biases. So they kind of should read the papers, but at the same time, the system hasn't been taken off the books and is still being used, even though it is incredibly racist and racially biased. Yeah, another kind of big locus of problems that we have come from private sector, because you may say, okay, you just showed us, a self-driving vehicle or, correctional offender system, but I mean, very few people will interact with these systems. So, like, what's the point here? Actually, if we take regular consumers or average consumers, and AI systems that serve those consumers, we already see serious issues with emerging technology there. So, for example, in 2019, well, as you know, a lot of the sort of systems like Alexa or Siri, they're usually portrayed as having either human capacity or beyond human capacity, so nearly human capacity. But should something go wrong, the company is kind of always arguing, "Oh, it's not Trivial Pursuit. It's not supposed to be a comprehensive system." So we had a problem with Alexa that was sold in many millions of homes by Amazon, and is still being used by many households. And it turned out that Alexa was listening in on conversation when it was supposed to be switched off, right? Obviously, even though Amazon originally said that this system was completely secure, practically no risks to users, it turned out that actually there was a risk, and a lot of the conversations that people probably didn't want the Alexa to hear were heard. And not only they were heard, they were analyzed, and sometimes they were analyzed by human analysts who could go and in de-anonymized manner actually access private data. So this is another kind of stream of problems. So essentially, I want to concentrate on issues of regulatory concern. I'm going to talk a little bit about EU regulation of artificial intelligence, self-regulatory initiatives, and some prospects for global regulation. And I have to say that I'm biased here. So I personally worked a lot on human rights perspective. So I'm afraid that my prospects will be more kind of leaning towards human rights framework. But I just want to say that I'm open to other views. It's just that's the one that I see particularly promising. So it might be that you have a different opinion, and I will I will be more than happy to hear like what other prospects we have. Yeah, so before we kind of delve into the regulatory issues, I just want to say that, we have quite a lot of ethical problems and legal problems associated with AI. Well, I just gave you several examples. But I really like this paper that was put by AI for People in 2018. It's a little bit dated, but the challenges did not change, in my opinion. And so they identified 5 challenges, which are mainly ethical challenges, but we can say that they are kind of between ethics and law. It's, AI systems may reduce human control, right? They can remove human responsibility, something that we just saw with a self-driving vehicle crash that I just presented. Devaluing human skills. Well, you probably all kind of fight with your kids at home, trying to sort of convince them that maybe they should spend less time on the computer. And in fact, we do have real issues with human skills, especially in terms of communication. Not only verbal communication, but now also written communication with the emergence of ChatGPT, and it kind of is a serious writing aid to a lot of people. So we may be losing some skills as a result of that. Eroding human self-determination. So we saw a lot of issues with platforms like Facebook that essentially became a threat to human democracy in many countries, and could be used for political targeting and things like that. And enabling human wrongdoing. So again, we saw just several examples when there was something wrong that was done, but then it's very difficult to assign responsibility because it was done by an artificial intelligence or algorithmic agent rather than human agent. Yeah. So, and in terms of issues of regulatory concern that I want to talk about, first I just want to kind of define artificial intelligence, because we had to do it for many regulatory documents, especially when we worked for the Council of Europe Risk Commission. So we had to define the AI, and it's extremely difficult because if you look at the literature, you will find like 1,000 different definitions, and they're not extremely helpful. So it's not really clear what we're talking about. So when I think about algorithms, I like to think about kind of three types of algorithms. So we have automatic and autonomous algorithms, and in autonomous we have autotelenomic and teleologic. So what do I mean by this? So automatic algorithms are basically algorithms that cannot determine their own purpose. Perhaps I will just go straight to the next framework here. So the automatic algorithms are algorithms that cannot determine their own purpose. And they only do what you, and they cannot also determine the pathway to get to the purpose. Well, imagine that you have a coffee machine, right? The coffee machine is an automated agent. So you have some buttons on this coffee machine. For example, you want to make a cappuccino. So you will push the button that says cappuccino and the machine makes cappuccino, right? So this is completely controlled environment in the sense that you tell the machine its purpose, that it needs to make a cappuccino, and it can only make a cappuccino in certain way, in the way in which it was programmed, right? Cannot make cappuccino in any other way. Now, autotelenomic machines are machines that cannot determine their own purpose. You determine the purpose as a human, but then it can determine the way to get to the purpose. So, for example, or some of you might have automatic lawnmowers or automated vacuum cleaners in your homes. And basically, if there is a machine learning model that sort of is embedded in this piece of machinery, then you can just give it a purpose. You can say, "Oh, clean the room," right? But then the vacuum cleaner will determine the most efficient way to go about the room to clean it. So this is what we call autotelenomic machine. And then we also have teleologic machines. So this is very interesting because every time we talk about AI with people imagine Skynet and Terminators. So they essentially imagine these teleologic machines. So teleologic machines are machines that can determine not only the way to get to the purpose, but the purpose itself. And I want to say that we are very far away from developing these machines, okay? I'm not saying that we shouldn't think how we're going to regulate them when, or should they arrive eventually into our lives. But at this stage, we even struggle sometimes to get algorithms read PDF files correctly, right? We are definitely not at a stage where we are developing machines that can determine their own purpose, right? So it's very important to understand. Right. So what should we be concerned about? So what are these matters of regulatory concern? So we have legal issues, right? So copyright, IP, liability, data protection, privacy, antitrust. I'm sure you can name a lot more issues here than me. We have ethical issues. So here we have human rights, we have bias, we have representation, we have equality, fairness, discrimination, singularity, all these types of ethical issues that, again, you are a lot more knowledgeable of these issues than me. And we also have governance issues, so accountability, transparency, explainability, all of these things are extremely, extremely important when we talk about AI systems or emerging technology systems. And, if we look at the framework of responsibility, currently we are in a framework where humans are 100% responsible. Although there are sometimes surprising decisions in the copyright domain. So as you know, we had a case in Australia where algorithm was found to be the owner of IP. I know that this decision is currently being kind of contested further. But it kind of sometimes we do get these outcomes where we kind of have shared responsibility, but essentially at the moment we are in this view 4 state of the world where humans are 100% responsible. And, internationally, most cases that we see in the legal domain kind of go towards the decision that, there should still be a human agent, a human subject that is a subject of law, rather than trying to sort of say that the machine is responsible for something. And when we look at regulation, we have a number of important issues. So, for example, AI has a lot of kind of connectivity and openness, which is difficult to anticipate, and all these risks need to be considered when we're talking about regulation. We have a lot of data dependency of AI actions. So if we don't have very good training data, we can produce algorithms that will be biased, well, like the compass algorithm that I gave an example of earlier in this talk. So certain level of autonomy that machines have, like I said, we have a lot of autonomic machines at the moment, like, for example, self-driving vehicles. We have machines that are in your home probably right now that are working with some machine learning algorithm at the back end. And, we cannot really observe what that autonomy is. We don't fully understand what the machine does, which is a problem. Opacity of operating systems. Sometimes we have very good algorithms that explain the data really well or explain human behavior very well, but they're essentially black boxes, and it's very difficult for us to make them explainable or make them rationalizable in human logic domain. Complexity of products and systems. So all of these technological systems are quite complex, quite difficult to navigate, and obviously regulating them and even listing them is a problem. As I mentioned before, we have a big lag between the development of technology and the regulation, and in my view, it will always kind of fall behind a little bit because we just don't have means and the time frames for various legal procedures are such that we will always be behind. And then there is a lot of heterogeneity in how different countries approach regulation of technology. I will actually show you a map that we have done with one of my co-authors. It's a kind of a cultural map and how different countries perceive regulation. It will be kind of more an application to cybersecurity domain, but any emerging technology would have some cultural differences in regulation. Well, as you all know, again, better than me, I'm sure that AI regulation currently is essentially European Union regulation. So this is where the most innovation is happening. So previously we had GDPR, right, the General Data Protection Regulation law, which was compulsory for all countries and dealt with the EU citizens' data. So even if you are a company from China, you have to abide by GDPR. This is quite an important document in terms of protecting rights of European Union customers. So any company that deals with the data of European Union customers has to abide by General Data Protection Regulation. And as a result of this regulation, we actually received a lot of interesting rights. For example, right to access, right to be forgotten, data portability, right, privacy by design, breach notification rights. So these are rights that are extremely, extremely necessary, but at the same time very difficult to enforce. Well, let me give you one example. As you know, we have quite a lot of blockchain solutions, and blockchain solutions cannot possibly incorporate right to be forgotten, right? So there are some like artificial ways how we try to introduce right to be forgotten, but the whole point of blockchain is that the blockchain remembers the entire history of everything and everyone, and it's very difficult to do anything about it. As I promised you that I will show you some cultural differences. So this is where we kind of map various cultural differences between countries in terms of their regulation of cybersecurity space. But you can see that, for example, there are some surprising ways in which, for example, United States is kind of closer to China than closer to some of the European countries in their understanding of risk and regulation. And essentially, we kind of have competitive countries and cooperative countries, and competitive countries tend to regulate more, cooperative countries tend to regulate less. And as you can see, Australia is kind of somewhere in between United States and the United Kingdom here, so we are quite sort of on on a competitive scale, and that also tells us that we probably are not paying enough attention to, for example, our First Nations heritage, because First Nations heritage tends to be more cooperative, whilst our regulation is very much still kind of colonial regulation, so more on competitive side. In the EU, we have high-level expert group on artificial intelligence that was formed in 2018. This group is working quite a lot on various regulations. For example, as you know, we are all in anticipation of AI Act to be fully operational by 2025. I mean, there are still quite a lot of processes that we need to go through to have this regulation, even at a European level. But essentially, the AI Act has it's a kind of risk-based regulation. It assesses various types of risks that we can have with technology, from unacceptable risk to minimal risk. And when we look at the risk, we actually see that things like facial recognition, surveillance, manipulation of behavior that causes harm is an unacceptable risk, whilst things like, for example, chatbots is a limited risk. So like, ChatGPT would be in this category. Access to employment would be a high risk, and the rest of potential risks that we're currently kind of considering when we're talking about AI systems would be in minimal risk. And it's anticipated that unacceptable risk will simply be prohibited or outlawed. So it actually will be, illegal to do these things. While there will be things that will be, just kind of needing conformity assessment, transparency obligation, or minimal risks will have no obligation. So they will have like some sort of optional. There will be some sort of documents that will explain these risks, but it will be optional whether to implement any restrictions on technology that bears these minimal risks.
Just before we move on, Ganna, just on that last slide, I had a question. We've got a question from a student as to why are the deep fakes rated as low risk?
No, deepfakes are not rated as
limited risk. Sorry.
They are rated as limited risk, simply because deepfakes are not just. So we always think about deepfakes as malicious, whereas deepfakes have like a really wide range of applications. Some of these applications are in gaming. So there is then, of course, when we're talking about criminal activity with deepfakes, that's a completely different issue. But deepfakes are also used in industry, and that's a fact. So, for example, quite a few video games and computer games are using deepfakes. Like you can use a deepfake technology to be impersonated as someone else in a game. And so we actually do quite a lot of work on deepfakes, and we looked into these games, and they're quite like, for example, voice. You can have a voice. You can change your voice in a computer game to sound like someone else. That would be using deepfake technology, but it's completely benign. It's not a it's not maliciously used. So I think when you have I'm not saying that that's necessarily correct. And again, you have to understand that this is a working document, right? So maybe deepfakes will be moved a step or two on this risk matrix. But because there are quite a few algorithms that are quote unquote deepfake algorithms that are used in industry, they're kind of placed in this limited risk category rather than high or unacceptable risk. But again, that there is an issue there. I agree in terms of like when deepfakes are used maliciously to cause harm. So I guess if you would have a deepfake that is not used for commercial purposes, but is manipulating behavior, causing harm, that would be unacceptable, right? So there is a difference there. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. It was a student question, but I actually had the same question in my mind when I saw it in the chat box. I think when you're with a group of law students, we always tend to think down the criminal lines.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that, but I think both the expert group and the European Commission, they are considering all the possible applications, right? And they have people like myself who come and explain like how these different algorithms are used in different domains. So whilst we tend to think about certain things purely negatively, there are usually the same algorithm. A technology is a tool, right? And the same algorithm could be used for completely benign purposes and for criminal purposes. And we have to understand that certain things will not be possible. Like, for example, as you know, you can authenticate, I believe, with Australian, with MyGov using your voice, right? I personally think that it's a bad idea, but we do have this possibility. And behind this authentication procedure is essentially the same algorithm that is used in voice deepfakes, right? So that's an example of when you're actually using, using a system that could be quite helpful to many people, especially if they are visually impaired or have some sort of disability, cannot authenticate another way to authenticate with voice. But if you prohibit that algorithm, you will have adverse consequences for these types of populations.
Thank you.
All right. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about self-regulation. So I personally, I think that there are many problems there. And I think when we go to self-regulation, we're talking less about law and more about ethics, right? So it's less something that we have to do and be compliant with law, but something that is defined by the private companies. And here we have quite a lot of possibilities. I personally think that regulation is definitely needed and should be introduced. Simply because the current self-regulation landscape is a mess, frankly, because we have a lot of companies defining ethics as they see fit, and very often, we all are kind of subjects to whatever Google decided or Amazon decided about ethics, rather than regulators making a weighted and informed decisions about what different technologies are. So in terms of this domain, like I said, there is a lot of heterogeneity and there is a lot of this pick your own approach type of things that we observe. And there is a lot of conceptual incoherence in what is ethical and what is not ethical when we talk about emerging technologies. So therefore, the regulation is key here. We really need to, to have this domain regulated rather than let various companies do things. But there are good things that are happening as well. So there are these voluntary AI ethics codes of conduct. even though we have all these different drawbacks, and we have some companies that championed really interesting approaches, like for example Mozilla championed the data trust approach. Data trust approach is like really interesting data governance approach, where you essentially providing consumers, a group of consumers, or consumer representative, with the possibility to negotiate about the rights of the consumers on their behalf. And there are trusted organizations that already have a lot of our data, like for example banks, right? We trust banks with our data. And we know that they're in business and securing our data. Otherwise, we will not be their customers. So there are kind of various organizations who are looking at these different pathways of self-regulation. But again, like they are too scattered and too sort of, too different, too distinct from each other to be sort of forming into any unified voice. And like I said, I see a lot of kind of a lot of interest and a lot of possibilities with these ethical codes of conduct in different organizations. But at the same time, it's clear that self-regulation alone will not work for this industry. Here are various examples. I mean, you will have the slides, and you can actually look them up later in your own time. So there are good examples of self-regulation when different companies tried, interesting experimental projects in data governance or data regulation, and they're quite good. But like I said, again, we do need some unifying framework here. So in terms of prospects, let's talk about the future. What the future holds for us. Well, Australian landscape and in that regard is kind of very minimalistic, right? We have artificial intelligence ethics framework, which is quite dated and was developed in 2019. We currently have the Department of Industry, Science and Resources released the discussion paper on supporting responsible artificial intelligence earlier this year, and the consultation period closed in July 2023. There are some sort of interesting thoughts there, but again, like from my perspective, I think that again we are, such documents should have Australian authenticity, and at the moment we are not paying enough respects to our First Nations heritage in these documents. We are not actually considering the cultural differences, right? So in terms of European regulation with a more sort of individualistic culture, it works quite well. The current regulation that the EU has, it works quite well. Whereas, in Australian context, First Nations people do not think in individual terms, right? So they think in terms of the country and in terms of community. So these values need to have a reflection. I'm not saying that it should be kind of the overarching theme for the document, but these values need to be reflected in the documents that we write in Australia about AI regulation. And at the moment, we are completely blind to First Nations people who have the right to, to see artificial intelligence or machine learning or emerging technology that really serve their values and their needs. So just kind of copying the European pathway here will not work for us, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to work towards that. And unfortunately, I haven't seen, like, I'm sure that you as experts in law have seen a lot more literature in that domain, but I haven't seen anything that would make First Nations people even visible to the regulation. So there are a lot of opportunities, so we can, really build these more trustworthy systems in artificial intelligence, and with technology and research being developed better in this domain, we actually have more and more possibilities to create systems that will serve people, will serve their values, will serve their communities. But again, it's hard work and there are many challenges. I just listed quite a few in my talk already, so I'm not gonna stop too much on this slide. But it's hard work. But we need to get to it as soon as possible, really, and not wait for European Union to provide some sort of solution for us that we can simply adapt to Australian realities. I believe that we really need to be more proactive in this domain. Yeah, so I'm a great believer in human rights approach, and again, like I said, you can view this as my personal bias, but I think that the framework of human rights really provides a unifying kind of global framework for all of us to follow, and artificial intelligence risks could be considered within this framework. So we have, the global documents at United Nations organization level, which talk about human rights. So surely within that framework, we can embed some of the new human rights that concern emerging technologies. So to me, I think this is probably, on a global scale, this is probably the most promising pathway. But at the same time, I just want to say that we need to think about the practicalities and things like data trusts, for example, or some other self-regulating things should not be ruled out, because they are providing solutions for kind of niche areas and allow us to work within these areas quite well. So we proposed a framework in our chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Ethics of AI, where we have kind of 4 steps in designing new emerging technologies, like design and deliberation, assessment, testing, and evaluation, independent oversight, and traceability. So, and I have to say the most difficult is the oversight and organizing the oversight in organizations. Well, as you know, universities are championing this approach because we have ethics committees that assess research projects, right? And without this assessment, we cannot actually do research. So for quite a few years, companies didn't have these oversight departments, but now in any large technological companies, we do have ethics, apart from legal department, we also have ethics department. We normally have an ethicist that could look at different technologies and at least highlight the potential risks of these technologies, so that we understand the potential damage that these technologies could do in the future. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of stop here and stop with this this sentence from Norman and Johnson paper, which was written in 2014, but I think it's really cool sentence, and this is how we should approach AI regulation and AI systems and emerging technology systems. So they said that we should be focused on developing responsibility practices that work to minimize risk and that clearly establish lines of accountability. So as long as we do that, so as long as we always know who is accountable, who is responsible, and how we make sure that we don't harm anybody with technology, we can actually progress. Okay, with that, before we go to questions, I'm just gonna ask you to complete a quiz, and for that you will need your mobile phones. So let me just get I'm gonna start sharing my screen. All right, so to participate, what you need to do is you need to go to kahoot.it and put in a pin that you see in at the top of the screen. So you need your mobile phone to do that. So if you go to www.kahoot.it, and yeah, I can see that some players are already arriving. Awesome. The quiz will be 5 questions, and it not only favors people who are answering questions correctly, but also people who quickly answer questions correctly. So you will be kind of judged by the accuracy and the speed. I'm gonna wait for maybe a couple of minutes more to see if some more people want to join. All right, so let's just start. All right, true or false question. Teleologic machines can determine their own purpose. So on your screen, you will see two colors. True is blue color, false is red color. So choose the color that you think reflects the correct answer. All right, all correct. So in fact, that's true. Teleologic machines can determine their own purpose, but remember that we haven't developed these machines yet. So Jody is in the lead at the moment. Second question. Which of the following does not represent an AI ethical challenge? Reducing human control, preventing human wrongdoing, devaluing human skills, removing human responsibility. You need to choose just one answer. And again, you will see the colors, red, blue, orange, or green, and you just need to choose one. Which of the following does not represent an AI ethical challenge? And again, the options are reducing human control, preventing human wrongdoing, devaluing human skill, and removing human responsibility. I think we're waiting for just two more people to make choices. Yeah, preventing human wrongdoing. So when you prevent something that's wrong, then obviously it's not a challenge. Whereas reducing human control, devaluing human skill, and removing human responsibility, these are all challenges. Okay, Jody's still in the lead. Becky in third place and Becky in second place and Maddie in third place at the moment. Third question. Australian companies using data of EU citizens do not have to abide by the GDPR law. True or false? Very simple question. Yeah, false. That's correct. Most of you got it right. So as long as any company from anywhere in the world is dealing with EU citizen data, they do have to abide by GDPR law. Okay, Becky's in the lead, Maddie second, and MN, I don't know who that is, but third. AI Act classifies chatbots as unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, or minimal risk. Unacceptable, high, limited, or minimal. Yeah, so limited risk. So the chatbots are limited risk, not minimal risk. So there will be some kind of regulation around them, but not as strict as when we talk about unacceptable or high risk. Okay, Amen is in the lead. Compass system was criticized because it produced racist outcome. It discriminated against young people. It discriminated against women. It produced ethical outcomes. And this is the last question. compass system. We talked about it at the beginning of the talk. Brilliant.
I think MN is Mark Nolan.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Okay, produced racist outcomes, and that's exactly correct. All right, so let's see who the winners are. FS, I don't know who that is, in third place. Mark, probably, if that's Mark, in the second place. And the winner is Becky. So Becky is in the first place today, and MN second place, FS third place. All right. All right, congratulations to Becky. I'm gonna stop sharing and take a few questions.
I'll just start with
Thank
a quick
you.
comment,
Yes.
Ganna, and that is to thank you so much for your time today and the presentation and the quality of it.
No
It just
worries.
reminded me of two things that Judge Musgrave reminded us of as a law reformer, and that's the value of comparative work in law reform, but secondly, the value for lawyers to continuously update their knowledge and talk to research scientists and others and experts who really understand what the challenges are. And we've had a great example of that here today. And if you, Ganna, can learn what you have learned about human rights to do the work that you do, we definitely as lawyers can learn about algorithms, we can learn about AI, we can learn about that technology. And that's the challenge of putting together research with practice. So thank you very much.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah. And I just want to also say that we have recruited a lawyer ethicist from RAND UK. Her name is Mark Motzi, and she's supposed to join us later this year. So when we clear the visa process and everything else. But I just want to kind of also extend the invitation to anybody who wants to collaborate with us on kind of legal and ethical issues. There will be a professional person in our institute who will be able to work with you guys if you want to.
I'm quite happy right now to stick my hand up to work with the Institute in terms of future collaborations. Part of the reason why we wanted to introduce ourselves more formally to the Institute was recognizing the interdisciplinary nature, and this is something that Ganna highlighted at the beginning of her session, the interdisciplinary nature of AI and the need to work across all the ethics,
there we go.
every single sciences, the challenges that face the future. And she spoke at length about, there we froze for a second. She spoke at length about as well about the need for cultural competence, which is incredibly important. You've all frozen there for a second. I hope you can still hear me okay.
Yeah, no, we can.
We do have a question actually from one of our other guest speakers, Ganna Russell, before you go. And it's a very specific question. I'm not sure if you would like to address it here. It's actually about blockchain, and he's asked, this is from Russell Kavanagh, he's asked, do you think technology such as blockchain will be used to deal with minor law decisions in the future in place of magistrates and tribunal decision makers? So looking at that sort of automated technology in that way.
Look, I personally think that so when we talk about law, any technology can only be used as a decision support system. It cannot replace a human being. So we worked a lot with, for example, police in London, and generally on different projects with UK police. And the challenge is always to write an algorithm that will stand in court of law, because any algorithm is a probabilistic system. It can make mistakes, right? And making mistakes in legal domain is extremely costly and should not be done by machines. So I think that we have done quite a lot of interesting work in terms of supporting legal decision making. Well, for example, especially in attribution domain, but having algorithms replacing any function of legal system, I mean, I personally, first, I think that would be extremely problematic. And second, I just personally, I find, again, this is judgmental, it's just my opinion, but I think that it shouldn't happen, period. Because, you know, any kind of probabilistic error with an algorithm, you know, could lead to loss of human lives here, and you know, serious consequences for the society. So you know, humans should always be at the, you know, in the middle of it, at the center of it, defining what the system is, especially considering that again, coming back to the earlier point that I made about values, right? Human values are different, dependent on culture, dependent on regulatory system of a particular society. And you know, to have an algorithm that is normally kind of a universal thing that could be applied in different circumstances will simply not cut it for the society.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And there's a note that Mark's made in the chat box about our technology law elective for both students and for Ganna's information as well. That's within our centre. And I just want to invite all the students to, and a lot of them have already expressed their appreciation for Ganna's taking time out of her very busy schedule to come and participate and to be with us today. We really do very much value you and appreciate your time with us this morning. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, and I just want to say to Mark's earlier point about learning about technology, you know, like I think that there are some domains, like for example, quantum domain, where it's quite difficult, you know, to put your head around like what's going on. Like, and you don't have to like be kind of understand every little bit of it. I just think that it's quite important to find like a partner in crime from a different discipline who can, you know, spend time and is willing to learn the language. And certainly in our institute, we have people like that. So I myself, like you could see, I'm not a legal expert, but hopefully like what I talked about was understandable and you could at least relate to some of what I said. So equally, like I just want to say, like you can make an impact on technology industry, and I think the key is in talking to each other. So thank you for the invite.
Thank you. The key is talking to each other, and thank you for making it so accessible to us.
No worries. Yeah, thank you.
Take care, and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm stopping the recording there. That's the conclusion